What you are about to hear is not just a story about laziness. It is not simply a story about poor time management. And it is certainly not a story about people who do not care about their responsibilities. It is a story about one of the most common human behaviors ever observed. A behavior that affects students, employees, entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, and even some of the most successful people in history. A behavior that quietly steals hours, days, months, and sometimes even years from our lives. A behavior known as procrastination. The act of delaying something we know we should do, even when we understand the consequences, even when we know the deadline is approaching, even when we genuinely want to finish the task. Why does this happen? Why do people postpone important work while spending hours on activities that are far less important? Why does a simple task sometimes feel impossible to begin? And why do intelligent, capable individuals repeatedly fall into the same cycle? Today, we explore one of the most fascinating mysteries of human psychology. Why do humans procrastinate? And perhaps even more importantly, can we ever truly overcome it? To understand procrastination, we must first understand something surprising. For centuries, many people believed procrastination was simply a character flaw, a sign of weakness, a lack of discipline, a failure of willpower. If someone delayed their work, the explanation seemed obvious. They were lazy. They lacked motivation. They simply needed to try harder. But modern psychology has revealed a very different picture. Because procrastination is not primarily a time management problem, it is an emotion management problem. And that distinction changes everything. Imagine receiving an important assignment. You know it must be completed. You know delaying it will create stress later. Yet instead of starting, you suddenly feel the urge to check social media, watch videos, clean your room, browse the internet, or do almost anything else. From the outside, it looks irrational. But inside the brain, something very logical is happening. Your brain is attempting to avoid discomfort. Because many important tasks create negative emotions. Uncertainty, fear, frustration, confusion, boredom, self-doubt, anxiety. And when the brain encounters these emotions, it naturally seeks relief. The easiest relief is avoidance. The easiest relief is postponement. The easiest relief is saying, "I'll do it later." And for a brief moment, that decision feels wonderful. The anxiety decreases, the pressure fades, the discomfort disappears, at least temporarily. This is where procrastination becomes dangerous, because the brain receives a reward. Avoiding the task makes us feel better in the short term. And whenever a behavior creates immediate relief, the brain remembers it. It learns. It adapts. It begins repeating the pattern. Over time, procrastination becomes a habit, not because we enjoy suffering, but because our brains become trained to seek temporary emotional comfort. Ironically, the more important the task becomes, the more likely procrastination can occur. Consider writing a book, launching a business, applying for a dream job, creating a major project. These goals matter deeply, and because they matter, they carry emotional weight. What if I fail? What if people judge me? What if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint myself? Suddenly, the task becomes associated with fear, and fear encourages avoidance. This is why people often procrastinate most on the things they care about most, not because they are indifferent, but because they care so much. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional avoidance. The task itself is not the real problem. The emotions connected to the task are. In fact, researchers have found that perfectionism often plays a major role. Many people imagine perfectionists as highly productive individuals, but perfectionism can become a powerful source of procrastination. Imagine wanting every piece of work to be flawless, every sentence perfect, every decision correct, every outcome successful. The problem is that perfection creates pressure, and pressure creates fear. If the result must be perfect, then beginning becomes frightening. What if it isn't good enough? What if mistakes happen? What if imperfections appear? Suddenly, doing nothing feels safer than trying. And so the project remains unfinished. Days become weeks, weeks become months. Not because the person lacks ability, but because perfection has made action feel dangerous. Interestingly, neuroscience has revealed that procrastination involves a conflict between different parts of the brain. One part focuses on immediate rewards, the present moment, instant comfort, immediate pleasure. Another part focuses on long-term goals, future success, planning, discipline, achievement. In many situations, these systems compete with one another. Imagine sitting at your desk. You need to work, but your phone offers entertainment. Your favorite show offers relaxation. A video promises instant enjoyment. The long-term reward of completing your project may be weeks away. The short-term reward of distraction is available right now. The brain often chooses immediate gratification. This tendency is known as temporal discounting. Humans naturally value immediate rewards more than future rewards, even when the future reward is larger. This explains why saving money is difficult, why exercising consistently is difficult, why healthy eating is difficult, and why procrastination is so common. Our brains evolved in environments where immediate opportunities often mattered more than distant possibilities. The modern world, however, requires long-term thinking, and that creates tension. Yet procrastination is not only about fear or immediate gratification. Sometimes it emerges from uncertainty. Imagine being assigned a task without clear instructions. You don't know where to begin. You don't know the next step. The project feels overwhelming. The brain dislikes ambiguity. When something feels confusing, starting becomes harder. As a result, people often delay not because the task is difficult, but because it is unclear. Researchers have discovered that clarity dramatically reduces procrastination. A project that feels enormous becomes easier when divided into small actions. Instead of write a report, the task becomes open the document, write the title, create the outline, write the first paragraph. Each step feels manageable. Each step reduces resistance. Another fascinating factor is identity. Many people unknowingly define themselves in ways that encourage procrastination. They say things like, I always work best under pressure. I'm just a procrastinator. I've always been this way. At first glance, these statements seem harmless, but identity shapes behavior. When people repeatedly tell themselves they are procrastinators, they begin acting accordingly. The behavior becomes part of their self-image, and changing behavior becomes more difficult. The opposite is also true. People who view themselves as individuals who take action often behave differently, not because they possess extraordinary motivation, but because their identity supports productive behavior. Throughout history, procrastination has affected remarkable individuals. Even great thinkers struggled with it. Even brilliant creators delayed important work. Even successful leaders battled distraction. This is important because procrastination is not evidence of low intelligence. In fact, highly intelligent people sometimes procrastinate more. Why? Because they can imagine more possibilities, more outcomes, more risks, more complications, and all those possibilities can create hesitation. Some people procrastinate because they fear failure. Others procrastinate because they fear success. Success brings expectations, responsibility, visibility, change, and sometimes those possibilities feel intimidating. The result is the same: delay, avoidance, postponement. Then comes guilt, And guilt is one of procrastination's most powerful allies. A person delays a task, then feels guilty. The guilt creates stress. The stress makes the task feel even more unpleasant. The increased unpleasantness encourages further avoidance, which creates more guilt, and the cycle continues. This cycle can become incredibly destructive, not because of the unfinished task itself, but because of what procrastination does to self-confidence. Every postponed goal sends a message. Every delay whispers, "You didn't follow through." Over time, these messages accumulate, and people begin doubting their own ability to change. Yet, psychologists emphasize something important. Procrastination is a behavior, not a permanent identity. Behaviors can change, habits can change, patterns can change. One of the most effective strategies is surprisingly simple: lower the barrier to starting. Most people focus on finishing. The brain focuses on beginning, and beginning is often the hardest part. Writing one sentence feels easier than writing an entire chapter. Reading one page feels easier than reading an entire book. Exercising for 5 minutes feels easier than committing to an hour. Action creates momentum. Momentum creates progress. Progress creates motivation, not the other way around. Many people wait for motivation before acting. Research suggests the opposite often works better. Action comes first, motivation follows. This is one of the most misunderstood truths about productivity. Successful people are not always motivated. They simply become skilled at acting before motivation arrives. Another useful insight involves self-compassion. Many people believe harsh self-criticism increases productivity, but excessive self-criticism often increases procrastination. When people constantly attack themselves for mistakes, tasks become associated with shame, and shame encourages avoidance. Studies suggest that individuals who respond to setbacks with understanding rather than harsh judgment often recover more quickly and return to action sooner. This does not mean avoiding responsibility. It means recognizing that progress is easier when the mind becomes an ally rather than an enemy. Technology has also transformed procrastination. Never before in human history have distractions been so accessible. A single device can provide entertainment, news, games, conversations, videos, music, and endless information. Every notification competes for attention. Every alert offers immediate stimulation. The modern brain faces challenges previous generations never experienced. And yet, the fundamental psychology remains unchanged. We still seek comfort. We still avoid discomfort. We still struggle between present desires and future goals. Perhaps this is why procrastination is such a universal experience. Because at its core, it reflects a deeper human reality: the conflict between who we are today and who we hope to become tomorrow. Every unfinished project, every delayed dream, every postponed goal exists within that space, a space between intention and action. But there is something encouraging about this realization, because if procrastination is not laziness, if it is not a permanent flaw, if it is not evidence of failure, then it becomes something we can understand. And what we understand, we can begin to change. The next time you find yourself delaying an important task, consider what emotion may be hiding underneath. Fear? Perfectionism? Uncertainty? Overwhelm? Because often, the real obstacle is not the work itself. It is the feeling attached to the work. And once that feeling is recognized, the path forward becomes clearer. In the end, procrastination is not simply about unfinished tasks. It is about being human, about navigating discomfort, about balancing present emotions against future aspirations. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: The people who accomplish extraordinary things are not necessarily those who never procrastinate. They are often the people who learn how to take one small step forward, even when they feel like waiting. Because progress rarely begins with perfection. It begins with action. One small action. One small decision. One small step. And sometimes, that single step is enough to change everything.